Happy Friday, everybody. I think we're here. I'm live on Instagram and I'm live on YouTube. Hope you're all doing well. So, today I want to talk about a topic that I talk about quite often, but today I want to talk about trauma. And I want to get into some of the details. It's something I haven't talked about in a while. It's been actually nearly a year since we've covered this topic. I want to talk about what trauma is and get into some of the details about what trauma is. Hey, T, nice to see you. Hi. So we're going to cover that. And I'm going to get into some of the details on statistics about what trauma does and what are some of the outcomes. And what happens is, I'll get to this in a little bit, actually. So let's cover now. What is trauma? Hi. Trauma is any significant event or incident that we perceive as life-threatening that has shaped us. As Peter Levine puts it, it's not in the event itself, but it's in the nervous system. So when your nervous system, perceives an event as life-threatening and kicks into fight, flight, or freeze response, slips into hyper or hypoarousal, and you're unable to cope effectively, you're in a trauma response. So your perception of an event as an adult is going to be wildly different than when you were a baby. Take, for example, a very loud noise. I'm going to use this example that I come across probably at least once a week. We have alleyways near our home, and there are very loud, very scary dogs that bark out of nowhere when you walk by. It scares the crap out of me. But if I were a little child, I would probably be traumatized, actually, very literally, and be terrified of dogs, perhaps for the rest of my life. But as an adult, because I have resources to cope, I'm able to calm my system down pretty quickly. I'm not traumatized by that dog. I'm able to get over it, but I do feel my entire nervous system kicking into high gear, into fight or flight response in that moment. So that's the difference in perception and our ability to manage and self-regulate in the moment. When trauma goes unresolved and we're unable to self-regulate for an extended period of time, we subconsciously adapt and cope by denying, dissociating, or burying the memories. You don't realize that you're doing this. It's totally a subconscious process. But what happens is over time, you end up, the trauma becomes part of your self-identity. And over time, you fall victim to the past instead of growing from the experience. And you live in a trauma brain, so to speak. You live in a trauma-induced experience. You may not even realize that you've suffered from trauma. So how can you identify that you have? How do you know? There are different ways. One of the ways you can identify if you've suffered from trauma, one of the most obvious ways, is that you can take the ACEs questionnaire. So I'm going to cover some of the details about what's in that questionnaire, what are the things they've found in that in a few minutes. And I'll have links to that in my email that I send out today. And if you're not signed up, you can sign up. I'll put a link in my story later, but you can also find it on the homepage of my website. Another way is that some people recognize they've suffered from trauma simply when repressed memories surface. Sometimes they surface when they're in therapy or in trauma coaching or through dreams. Sometimes they're just simply triggered in the middle of a day, out of nowhere, and they realize something's really wrong. Another way to learn if you suffered from trauma is you begin by watching a video like this, and you learn the causes and symptoms of trauma and recognize your own experience in them. So if you'd like to join me, I am going to invite you to join a practice, a somatic practice right now. I'm going to read through some different experiences that result in trauma. Some of them are less apparent than you might imagine. They might sound like ordinary experiences. But again, like we said, trauma is in the nervous system. It's not in the event itself. So if you'd like to join me now, we're going to do this practice. It'll only take a minute or so. And let's begin. I'll invite you to close your eyes. Take a nice deep breath. And start to connect to your body. Right now, notice how your body's feeling. Notice any sensations you're currently having. Feel yourself grounded and rooted in your chair. If your feet are on the ground, feel yourself rooted on the ground. And as I read through this list, let your body speak to you. Notice any tingling, muscle tightening, loosening, any changes in breath or heart rate, temperature, any feelings you might get in your gut or your chest. Notice if any images or sensations come to you in the form of colors or shapes. You may also not experience anything at all. Whatever happens, observe your body's reaction. So I'm going to begin reading the list. And again, simply observe what happens to your body and to you. War. Experiencing or witnessing violence or abuse. Severe emotional abuse. Neglect, abandonment, or betrayal during childhood. Catastrophic illness or injuries. Rape. Foster care. Suicide attempts or suicide in the households. Sexual abuse. Illnesses, high fevers, COVID. Natural disasters like fires, earthquakes, tornadoes. Being left alone as a child or a baby. Loud noises. Invasive medical or dental procedures. Anesthesia or restraint, especially as a child or a baby. If you're a woman, childbirth. Falls or other minor accidents or injuries. Auto accidents, especially like with whiplash. Prolonged immobilization, casting, scoliosis, splintering. And as you sit with that list, what came up for you? And slowly come back. That is by no means an exhaustive list. Trauma can, of course, include something as simple and non-eventful as a child sitting in a classroom being called on to give an answer and simply being terrified. Right? Everybody's experiences are different. And again, it's not the event, it's the experience in your nervous system, your fight or flight response kicking into high gear, and the inability to regulate yourself. So I want to cover some things about trauma and the ACEs study, because this is really where my work comes into play. Because what they found, they started studying trauma in the 1990s and putting out research, trying to figure out, does trauma impact people later in life? And unequivocally, they found that yes, it does. I think the number one piece of information that came out of this is that, I'm going to read this because it's really important. The higher the ACE score, the worse the outcome in nearly every area. So 16% of people have experienced at least 4 traumatic events. And in the ACEs study, traumatic events are some of the big T's, the bigger traumas, like neglect, physical and sexual abuse. And this is everything that happens before the age of 18 in your household. So those were some of the first things that I read off on during that somatic practice we just did with trauma. 87%, nearly 90% of people have experienced at least one traumatic event. That's a pretty significant number of people. What I found more profound is that preventing ACEs, preventing these traumatic events in childhood, could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. And preventing these traumatic events, preventing ACEs, could reduce 1.9 million cases of heart disease and up to 2.5 million cases of overweight and obesity, as well as something like 27% of cases of COPD, which they linked to smoking. And then there were all sorts of other stats, and they compound on top of each other. Yeah, wow. The statistics are staggering. Trauma is unequivocally linked to negative outcomes later in life, whether it's emotional, depression, anxiety, suicide, etc., or physical, chronic illnesses. So if you're wondering why you're sick, if you're wondering why you have anxiety or depression or whatever, chances are it could be, and most likely is, linked to earlier trauma. And some of it might be before an age that you're aware of, or might be repressed memories. And that's my PSA for today. In my email, again, I'm going to link the ACEs study. There, I'm going to link both the main questionnaire and the questionnaire for the health. It comes from the CDC website. And then from there, you can also explore around and take a look at some of their infographics and all the information they share on that. Again, with the ACEs, it's more of the major traumas. And what I like to really impress upon everybody is that there's a lot of trauma that the ACE questionnaire does not cover. There's a lot of trauma people experience that is not touched upon in that questionnaire that you may have experienced and may be suffering from, that is worth getting help for. So I hope you have a beautiful weekend. You are so welcome. Taryn, it's great to see you. Have a beautiful weekend. Take care.